Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this week's virtual plant clinic. My name is Bill Lester. I'm with University of Florida IFAS Extension Service here in Hernando County. And with me today is my regular co-host, Lily Browning, our Florida-friendly landscape coordinator, is it?
Program coordinator. You were pretty close. Yes.
Okay, program coordinator. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And today we got a special guest star in here with us. Mike
Woohoo.
also works for Hernando County, and he is the director or coordinator.
Director would be a really nice way to say it, but my official title is Conservation Lands Specialist.
Oh, you're specialist. That sounds even better than coordinator.
Yeah, it's a pay grade below, I think. So we're working on that.
Well, Mike Singer is here in Hernando County, and he is in charge of the environmentally sensitive lands program.
Yes,
so
sir.
He's going to tell us all about that today. But first, we got a couple people on here this morning.
Buddy is here.
Good morning, Buddy. Buddy is one of our regular viewers, and he is from up in Tallahassee?
Yes.
Up in the Panhandle. So.
Yeah. Bill never remembers that Tallahassee.
No. I know Panhandle.
Yeah.
But it's either Tallahassee or Pensacola, so it's Tallahassee.
Tallahassee, yes.
Okay, Mike, why don't you tell everybody pretty much what you do as the specialist for the environmentally sensitive land? What are the environmentally sensitive lands?
Yeah, what does that mean?
Yeah, great. So great question. So the environmentally sensitive lands program is basically Hernando County's conservation lands. So most folks know of like the state conservation land that's here. We've got multiple state agencies. We've got the Water Management District, which is also known as SWIFMUD. We've got the Florida Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. Those are the main players, and we've also got DEP with the state parks. So they've all got their conservation land, and Hernando County has its own conservation land that they've purchased to preserve and to manage for conservation and for the resources that are there. So so the program, the Environmentally Sensitive Lands Program, began in 1988, and it was a voter referendum where the citizens of the county voted to have this program, and they also voted to collect a millage rate and taxes to fund the program. So it's supposed to be 1/10 of a mil for 30 years. And then that money was to be for the acquisition and management of these properties deemed environmentally sensitive. And what does that mean? What does environmentally sensitive lands mean in terms of Hernando County? And that's basically properties that have rare or threatened or some sort of critical habitat. Okay, that's also areas of like water recharge or areas for water protection. So we've got one property, Peck Sink, which, as the name indicates, it has a sinkhole on it. And the sinkhole it's not the sinkhole that you generally hear of opening beneath a road or sucking in a house, right? This is an open hole in the ground, and all the water in the watershed around it, or the basin, all drains to the surface water, and it's a direct connection to the aquifer. So you can kind of see that would be an important property, to protect and have some protections on, because we don't want to contaminate our groundwater, which is our drinking water. So, other factors for the program, that would make a property eligible would be, rare, threatened, or endangered species that are only found on that property, or some sort of cultural, resource. So, a couple of the properties have cultural resources. Peck Sink, for example, has, some old, cultural resources on site.
Yeah, archaeological finds.
Yeah, right. Bayport. So Bayport is technically owned by, by the Water Management District, but the county leases it for the additional boat parking, and there's a small park there. So that it has some cultural resources there as well, archaeological stuff. And then one of the other programs or properties within the program is actually Chinsigat Hill. Most folks don't know that, and that in itself is a kind of cultural thing. It's on the National Register of Historical Places. The county doesn't actually own that property, but they have a long-term lease, and we're responsible for the management of it. And my program specifically manages the what you would consider the natural areas surrounding the house, so all the forested land around the manor house and the retreat. So if I could, Bill, I'd like to share my screen. I've got just a map that shows the location of the properties in the program. So I'm assuming
sure. Go ahead and give it a shot.
Yeah. Let's see here.
I work for the county, and I didn't realize that you managed Chinsigat Hill, that was one of your properties.
So let's see. Share screen.
It's a little tricky. You have to already have it up.
Yeah, I do. So it's blinking there. I don't know.
There it is. Oh, it's still blinking.
Yeah. That's not safe. Let's all right.
Somebody a seizure with that one.
Yeah, that's not. Let me. I'm gonna try it one more time.
I did see around the county where they were.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's hope that doesn't. No, still blinking. All right. So I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I don't think that's gonna work. But yeah, so we've got 5 main properties in the program. We've got Fickett Hammock, which is kind of in the northwestern portion of the county. It's basically forested hammock, hardwoods there. 155 acres. Yep. And then we've got Chinsigat Hill, which is kind of just north of Brooksville, about 5 miles on US 41. That property is 112 acres. 114. And we've got Lake Townsend Preserve, which is 375 acres. And that's mostly overgrown sandhill. And what we're doing there is we're working to restore the sandhill, but also one of the main objectives in terms of habitat restoration on that property is to create a recipient site for gopher tortoises. So every time there's a project that the county does, basically for infrastructure or something, and it's absolutely necessary to relocate a gopher tortoise from that project. We're hoping to be able to get permitted by the state to relocate them to this property. Part of their requirement is having property that meets specific habitat criteria to be able to do that. So that's a big ongoing project there. There's also a park at that property that's operated by the Parks and Rec Department, and that entire property used to be specifically just part of the Parks and Rec Department until earlier in the mid 2000s, kind of during the recession. And we've got Cypress Lakes Preserve, which is in Ridge Manor. It's right along the Withlacoochee River. And that is our most ecologically diverse property. It's 331 acres, and there's like 8 natural vegetative communities there. One of which is Florida scrub, which is considered, I think, imperiled. I don't know that it's considered endangered, but it certainly is. There's less and less of it every year due to development statewide. But scrub is only found in Florida, and it is home to a handful of species which are only found in scrub. For example, the Florida scrub jay. So while we do not currently have any scrub jays on the property, we're working hard to manage that scrub and get it back into optimum condition, in the hopes that nearby populations in the Withlacoochee State Forest might translocate there and establish their own territories. So that would be really significant if it did happen. I was in a scrub jay working group, like a statewide scrub jay working group last week, and one of the things that came about from that meeting was just different scrub management techniques. And then somehow I found a resource from the 80s, right, mid 80s, and it talked about scrub jays being present in that vicinity of that preserve back then, when that habitat wasn't so overgrown and so developed around it. So that's pretty neat. And then the last of the 5 main properties, which I already briefly talked about, was Peck Sink Preserve, which, again, as the name indicates, has an active sink on it. The watershed around it is like 11,000 acres. So when we have any significant rain, all the surface water goes there, and the stormwater department, they have like a stormwater basin, like a series of basins there that pull off trash and sediment and excess nutrients to help filter that as protection, before the water heads to the sink and then directly into the aquifer. So in total, there's about 1,200 acres of property that I manage, and I'm the only one in my program. So it's a big deal, a lot of work, a lot of projects always going on, juggling, time and money and that sort of thing.
So pretty much all of those, with the exception of Peck Sink, are open to the public, correct?
That's correct. So that's a great point. One of the criteria for the properties within the program is public access. So Peck Sink does have public access, but it's by appointment only. So if folks wanted to go there, they would have to contact me. And, Bill, maybe you can put a link to my information with the recording of this meeting, so folks can contact me if they want in the future.
What's your email?
msinger.
Yep.
msinger@hernandocounty.us.
Yeah. Yeah. So folks can email me and we can set up a time to go out there. But one of the projects that we have going on is to enable public access at that property on a more regular basis, where they don't need an appointment. So we received a grant recently from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, and it's through their recreational trails program. So it's a mouthful, but the point is we've obtained some funding to improve the parking area, which is already there and existing, and then build an ADA accessible hiking trail from the parking area to the sink, and then an observation platform at the sink. So folks can safely view the sink and see what's all there. And I don't know if any of the listeners out there or viewers have ever been to Devil's Mill Hopper in Gainesville, Florida, but it's very similar. It's just on a much smaller scale. Yeah, that's pretty impressive. Devil's Mill Hopper is, and Peck Sink is as well. I mean, I think it's about 50, 60 feet deep. So that's pretty big, and maybe 100 yards across at the top. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty neat. But to think something like that's, just kind of right here in Hernando County, just outside of downtown, is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you'd never think that it was back there, tucked back in the woods. And I know that, Lily and I both been there. on hikes, and you want to be very careful. You don't want to fall in the great big hole in the ground. So that's great that you were able to get grant money to add a boardwalk, and hopefully it'll be more accessible to more of the public. Because I know with your other properties, you have hiking trails and hiking opportunities.
Mhm.
That's right. So at PeckSync, excuse me, so PeckSync will have this property soon, and then in Cypress Lakes we've got a series of hiking trails there, and actually a segment of the Florida National Scenic Trail runs through
Mhm.
Cypress Lakes, which is really cool. So for that trail is a statewide trail, and it runs from the Everglades all the way up to the Panhandle and into, I think, into Georgia. So that's really cool, and it pretty much follows the Florida Wildlife Corridor, and it's primarily all through conservation land. So that's really cool. So the segment of that trail that runs through the property is 1.5 miles. And then we've got about a 2.3 mile hiking loop at Fickett Hammock.
Yeah, it is, but it feels like 5.
It does feel much longer than it is, and it's kind of because
It's really cool. Yeah.
you're so secluded out there. I mean, it's
amazing because you're not far from, a 6-lane highway, but
Right.
you really, you really feel. I had been to all of the other sites just from living here for so long, and then Mike guilted me into going over to Cypress Lakes because I hadn't been there yet.
Mhm.
And I only did the part from Rich Manor Boulevard back to the fire station.
Yeah.
And oh my gosh, in all my 43 years of living in Florida, never have seen cypress trees that big. And we did it in March. So we went through the really swampy section, and it wasn't hot yet, and the mosquitoes weren't out yet.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm eager to go back in the fall.
Yeah.
I was expecting Yoda to come out of the swamp, but it was just really amazing there.
Yeah. That's my favorite property because of the diversity, and it's so cool to hike that trail and be down in the Cypress Dome, and then walk the edge of it, and then emerge out into like the kind of scrubby flatwoods, and then border the scrub that's there. It's just really unique and really neat. There's always lots of I feel like there's lots of birds, especially in the spring.
Mhm.
We actually just did a prescribed burn out there on Monday, and we were working on burning a portion of the scrub, and it was so dry, which you need a little bit more, a little drier conditions and stronger winds than you would typically need for a typical prescribed burn, just to have the fire carry. And we had to really kind of baby the fire along the fire break until it backed off into the unit enough and was established, to establish our baseline before we could kind of really let her rip through there. And just about the time we were ready to really get ignition, really full blast, this one little isolated thunderstorm developed right over us and extinguished everything.
Well, since you brought that up, why don't you tell us why do they what is the purpose of fire management in Florida's forests and ecological land?
Yeah, so I mean that's a great thing to talk about too. So most folks, they don't know or understand. It's kind of counterintuitive to think fire is good, but it really is. And a lot of Florida's ecosystems in the South east in general, they're fire adapted, meaning they need fire to survive. Most of the plants, once they burn, it doesn't kill them. It kind of helps them to regenerate, and a lot of them, they need that to even propagate seeds. Wiregrass, for example, is dominant ground cover in a lot of longleaf pine ecosystems, and that, one, it helps to carry the fire, and two, it needs fire to germinate so it can produce seeds and keep on living in that ecosystem. But also other benefits of fire besides those that I just mentioned, it fire consumes dead fuels or excessive fuels that could, once they build up over years and years and years, those could lead to damaging wildfires if they ignited. And prior to, I guess, European settlement in the area, and a lot of habitat fragmentation and fire suppression, fire is naturally occurring on a very regular basis. Florida is the lightning capital of the world, and generally most fires were always started by lightning, and then they would just kind of carry this, through the landscape, burning things, and because they happened on basically like a yearly basis, you never had so much fuel on the ground that it was a damaging fire, and there was nothing to stop it. There were no roads to stop it. There was no firefighters to come out and extinguish the flames, so it would just burn through the landscape, and that fertilizes the ground. It creates excess or extra nutrients that are essential for plants, and all the new regrowth that comes. If anyone's ever seen an area a couple weeks after a prescribed burn, I mean, everything is just starting to grow back, and it's very, very green, and it's nice and young, tender vegetation that's really actually necessary for a lot of animals.
It's really cool because you still see the charred look from the burned fires, but yet that, like you said, that new spring green is popping up out everywhere. Yeah. Right.
Yep. So as land managers, we burn different times a year for different things. If we've got a super excess of fuels in an area that we're going to burn, we might burn in the dormant season, which would be the winter, when things aren't as green, and there's less growing fuel or flashy fuels, kind of to so we have a lower intensity fire. But in the growing season, is when you get more desirable results in terms of ecological benefit. You get suppression of woody encroachment in areas where you shouldn't have, like the shrubby woody plants, like wiregrass, for example. If you burn it in the winter, it's not going to germinate and have those new seeds, whereas if you do it in the summertime, it will. And then summer burns, also, you'll get a lot more wildflowers that come back following that, kind of based on the same principles. But really cool, really misunderstood. So public education is a big thing. I know everyone's familiar with Smokey the Bear, and Smokey the Bear was so good at getting the message across that it was too good. So they used to say, I think, only you can prevent forest fires, and at some point they changed it to only you can prevent wildfires, because they wanted to differentiate between fires, good fires and bad fires. Right. So now I guess the language that we use is, good fire when you're doing a prescribed burn versus a bad fire would be a wildfire, one that's not intended to be there, or one that could have damaging effects on health or
You're literally fighting fire with fire as well, too, because you are burning up all that excess brush and debris and everything that would be fuel for a wildfire. So aside from that's what Florida's naturally a fire-maintained wilderness, but also you are getting rid of a lot of those biofuels or what that would feed a out-of-control forest fire.
Right.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people don't. It might seem a little counterintuitive to people who've just moved to Florida from up north that there's an actual art and science to starting forest fires. And I know a lot of people aren't really big fans of it because if there's a controlled burn somewhere near their house, it might get a little smoky and you have ashes and people will complain. But I know years ago, and it was probably 20 years ago at this point when we had the really big outbreak of forest fires during a drought, all the areas that hadn't been maintained and burned in a number of years caught fire from lightning, and they had huge fires that were very destructive and burned down a lot of houses because it wasn't properly maintained on a regular basis and burned on a regular basis. So way too much fuel had built up and you had these, massive forest fires instead of the small, controlled, managed burns.
Right.
But this is not something your homeowner should go.
No. We
No,
make
set
sure
fire to
homeowners
your yard.
don't go out and manage the backyard this way.
Right. So Florida is a what they consider a right to burn state. So technically, homeowners, I don't want to say just, any person, but people can burn their property under Florida law. And
but if it gets away from you and you cause damage or loss to anybody else, you are fully responsible.
Correct. Yes, you are 100% liable for that. So the Florida Forest Service, who is, the managing kind of top ranking agency on fire in the state, they're the ones who authorize burn permits. They provide training courses for folks to learn the proper way to do it and to actually become certified. And when you're a certified burner, you actually have some protection under the law through your burn, through your burn certification.
You're still referring to someone who lives in the woods or on a lot of acreage. You're not referring to someone who lives in a deed restricted community.
Yeah, Spring Hill.
Right. Yeah. So this would be more for agricultural land.
Right.
Or folks who have some land that they want to manage with fire.
Probably, even though the state may allow it, probably your neighborhood has a restriction against you setting your yard on fire.
Right. Yeah. So very, very important distinction to make there.
Yes.
And your homeowners association probably would take a really dim view.
Absolutely.
Well, there's a lot of communities that don't even allow bonfires or trash burning or something.
Yep.
So it'd be under that same principle. Because you're a dense community and people don't want to deal with your fires. So
okay, well, hey guys, if y'all have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and put it in the chat.
I think there was
one question a little bit earlier, so let me go ahead and answer this one real quick before I forget it and misplace it. Joseph, one of our regular viewers, asks, is it too late to plant corn? Yes, it is. Here in Central Florida, when are they harvesting corn around? They've already harvested it for the spring, right?
Well, they're real close to it. I know one of the corn farmers had hoped he would have a crop available Friday and Saturday, but just put out a message on Facebook that nope, not quite ready, not up to his standards, but we're real close to harvest time.
Yeah, so spring corn is getting harvested right about now. You can try growing it in the fall, but you want to wait until, I would guess, middle of August at the earliest. And corn can be really tough for homeowners to grow. It has a lot of bug problems. You get a lot of corn earworms and a couple different species of caterpillars in it that are really difficult to control. But you can try it. They obviously grow corn here in Central Florida. We do have U-Pick corn farms. And I know down in South Florida, earlier in the spring, they grow a huge amount of corn down there.
I would just go to the corn farms and let them do it.
Sure, it's a whole lot easier that way.
I think there's at least 2 in our county. One 98 North and one down off of Powell Road.
And Leanna asks, how do you get your garden soil tested? And I know, Leanna, I'm not sure if you live here in Hernando County or which county you live in.
It does, yes.
Okay, if you live in Hernando County, just contact our office and I'll show the phone number in just a moment. You can come by the office and pick up a form, and you fill out the form and you send it along with your soil sample, just a small sample, about a handful of soil in a paper bag, to the soil testing lab up in Gainesville, and they'll test it and send the results back to you and back to us also.
You might want to email her the link where you can find it online, because she works about the same hours that you do. So.
Okay. Well, if you call our office, Teresa will answer the phone and she can help you out. If you want to shoot me an email, I'll email you the link to the soil testing lab. You can download the order form online with all the directions and the information that you have to provide on it. It's really simple. And because we don't do the testing here in the county, we send it off to Gainesville. You could send it off directly to Gainesville just as easily. You really don't have to stop by the office for any of the information. Very important, you want to send your sample up in a paper bag, not a plastic baggie. Because if it's at all moist in a plastic baggie, it's going to get really funky and nasty, and that makes it harder to test. Paper bags breathe, so if you have a paper lunch bag, that'll work just fine to send your sample off.
You have a loquat.
Oh my God! See, everybody's we're gonna have to save one of these questions for Mike. So we got Kirby and Tiffany say, I have a loquat tree that's about 3 feet tall, so it's just a little one. There's something nibbling on the leaves and brown spots on the underside of the lower leaves. I don't want to lose it, and they're in Pinellas County around Madeira Beach. So for anything that's nibbling on the leaves, you're going to have to basically catch whatever's doing it. If you look at the leaves and turn them over, if it's caterpillars don't fly or run really fast, so the caterpillar is going to be there. You're going to be able to see him. There are beetles that chew on leaves, and they're a little bit harder to catch in the act, because when you get close, they might, jump off or drop off onto the ground or possibly fly away. But you're going to have to be kind of stealthy and catch whatever is chewing holes on the leaves, because what you do to control caterpillars is different from what you do to control beetles or control anything else. Brown spots on the undersides of the lower leaves. As the tree grows taller, it will lose the very, very bottom leaves. They're probably going to get some kind of fungal leaf spot and drop off over time. So as long as you don't have a lot of brown spots on it, or you're losing if you're losing more leaves than what the tree is producing, that's bad, because eventually you're going to run out of leaves. But if you're just losing the occasional leaf at the bottom, that's not anything to really worry about a whole lot. If you like, you can just take a bunch of pictures and email them to me, and that'll give me a better idea of what might be wrong with it. And I'll either show the pictures next week. Next week, we'll be back here again Thursday morning, and I think it's going to be just me. So send me pictures. That way I have something to talk about next week. and we'll figure out what it is. But if you do have leaves that are getting chewed on, you're really going to have to try to catch whatever might be doing it. And if you do catch it and you take a picture of it and send it to me, we can figure out what it is very, very easily. So there's my email if you want to shoot me some pictures. And Mike, one other thing that I wanted to bring up today, and that comes up on a regular basis here, is invasive plants. And I know we normally talk about invasive plants from the perspective of in somebody's yard, and most people have, you know, reasonable sized yards. I know people that live out in the country. If you have 10 acres, it's a different situation. But people might have one lantana. I have a lantana, and it's growing out of the side of my Sylvester palm tree. Obviously, a bird ate one of the berries off the invasive lantana and landed in the tree and planted it. So I think it's still out there as kind of an example. But a lot of people think that, you know, well, if I have an invasive plant or 2 or 3 in my yard, I keep them under control and they're never going to go anywhere else. And I'm, you know, it's just fine for me to have invasives. But I'm kind of interested, how does that impact you? Because how many acres are you responsible for?
So I'm responsible for roughly 1,200 acres.
Wow, that's a lot of acres.
It is a lot of acres.
I can't even picture that. You know what that.
If I had my map, if my map was working,
yes.
You know what?
So you don't have time to go out there and pluck up every lantana or baby camphor tree or China berry or whatever else pops up, do you?
I do not.
But see, those people who say I keep it under control, you know, I want to know which one of us controls the birds or the wind. And just because it's not popping up in your yard doesn't mean it's not showing up on Mike's lands or other, or even worse, land that is not being managed. That's just, you know, empty. You know, nobody's empty lots. Undeveloped lots, I should say, that nobody's managing.
Yeah.
And then that creates issues for you.
That's right. So for me, invasive plant management is probably, I don't want to say it's the most time consuming part of my job, but it is probably the most taxing on my annual budget. Mm-hmm. It's expensive to control invasive plants, and invasive plants are detrimental to our natural Florida ecosystems. So, you know, like you've both mentioned, you know, Joe homeowner could have a camphor tree in his yard and say, well, it's not going anywhere. It's not spreading, you know, there's not camphor trees popping up in my neighbor's yard, and I don't have seedlings popping up in my yard.
But they do.
But
they do. They know.
Well, I have in the past from a neighbor.
Right. But you know, most folks, they mow their yard regularly, and so that's going to suppress anything in the immediate vicinity. But you know, you've got all those natural vectors out there that carry, you know, the seed source or whatever, you know, manner that those plants propagate themselves. You're having those dispersed all over through those mechanisms. So, you know, birds, like Bill mentioned, you know, carrying the seeds or dropping them, and you know, the wind dispersing spores, and I mean, they can travel miles and miles. Peck Sink, for example, right, carries all those seed sources from, you know, that 11,000 acre basin to Peck Sink. So we've got a big invasive plant management problem, or invasive plant problem at Peck Sink. And
you have Kogan grass there?
Yeah, we've got Kogan grass, we've got camphor trees, we've got skunk vine, Japanese climbing fern. We've got a lot. But you know, at some point, those depending where you are, right, things become unmanaged. And the reason, you know, these plants are invasive, is because they don't have something in this ecosystem, right, that controls them. So in their home, territory or wherever they originate from, they may not be invasive because there is some kind of animal or plant or natural resource that controls them there and keeps them from out competing the other vegetation or whatever. But a great example is Chinsegut Hill, and a lot of the plants there kind of started as what a lot of people do here.
Right.
Hey, that's pretty.
Right.
Let me plant it, and I'll just keep it in my little garden.
Because that was somebody's home, and the different people, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that was the thing, was to have exotic plants.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, one of them wanted to experiment and create plants that didn't exist anywhere else. And,
I mean, look at the water hyacinth. Okay, I think everybody knows what a water hyacinth is. They can be considered to be very beautiful. I mean, I guess maybe knowing the detriment that they have, I don't look at them that way so much. But in the 1800s, they were at the World's Fair in Louisiana, and they were selling them. Mm-hmm. Somebody brought one over here to Florida and had it in their little water garden, their pond, and it overtook the pond because they basically divide themselves and make more every couple of weeks. And next thing you know, their pond was full of them, so they threw them out into the St. Johns River, and in a matter of a couple of years, the St. Johns River, almost the entire St. Johns River, was impassable. Mm-hmm. And at that point, that was a major commerce route for moving goods. I mean, that was one of the primary ways that people got things moved around back then was via boat on that river. And it had a big impact on the economy. So the rest is kind of history there. I mean, that plant is not as detrimental as it used to be because of modern technology and proper management. And with invasive plants specifically, I mean, you can't just use one thing. You've got to do integrated pest management. You've got to look at all the different, prevention, education, cultural, chemical, mechanical. You've got to use all those means, every tool in your toolbox, to take care of them.
What Bill and I hear is, but it's pretty.
Mm-hmm.
Or, I keep it contained, or, and I always tell people there's no such thing as a bad plant. Nature didn't create a bad plant, nor most likely did that plant, sometimes over millennial, animals may move them around on their fur or whatever. Mm-hmm. But as far as the moving plants where nature never put them, that's us. We did that.
Oh, we do a fantastic job moving those things around.
Right, either on purpose in the nursery trade or just ship ballasts, the movement that we do. Mm-hmm. And you take that plant, as you said, away from its natural checks and balances, then you have the wrong plant in the wrong place.
Yep.
So.
But Melinda asked here, we were talking about the lantana. There are Florida-friendly or native species of lantana. And if you grow them, they're just fine. I mean, that's a natural part of Florida's environment. The problem is the Lantana camara, mm-hmm. that is native to Brazil, I think. Mm-hmm. And that's the one that spreads like crazy because it flowers, but it also sets little berries. And birds like those little berries. And birds will eat the berries and fly around and then deposit the berries far and wide. And I know, where was it? We were over on the coast, or Mike, you pointed out once before a big patch of the invasive lantanas out there at Bayport, I think.
Bayport, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. because Brittany was working on cleaning those up.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Lantana,
residents, homeowners didn't plant them out there. They some of these things. That's one of the components of an invasive plant is that it spreads like crazy. It spreads very, very well.
well, probably a homeowner in Hernando Beach, did have it in their yard.
If it's native range, it gets eaten by insects and animals and preyed upon by viruses and fungi. But here, it just spreads like crazy. And then it costs all of us a huge amount of money controlling invasive plants.
And yes, even the bad plants are going to attract butterflies and wildlife. I mean, that's some of how it gets spread around too. And so it has that good quality. Any lantana is going to attract a slew of butterflies, but you have to weigh out the damage that it's causing and the overall damage to the ecosystem and to our economy and to,
Yeah. So, interesting point about attracting butterflies, and I'll kind of come back to that in just a minute. But one thing I do want to mention, in terms of managing conservation land or natural areas, most managers think of invasive plants as an issue of the ecosystem, and it is, but they affect much more than a natural ecosystem or plants and animals. A couple of years ago, I was working on a Kogan grass removal project, and we were working with a professor from Florida A&M University, which some folks may not know. Florida A&M University has a satellite area here in Brooksville. And this professor who was there, a researcher, he was from South Africa, or not South Africa. He was from somewhere in Africa, and he was doing some research there. And I learned that in a lot of third world countries where they don't have the technology or the means to control things like we do, and invasive plants basically, are kind of become a matter of life and death, right? So some of these villages where he was working, Kogan grass had invaded, and I don't know how it got there, but it had invaded their kind of crop areas and was overtaking them, and they depended on these gardens and these crops for their survival, for their primary food source. And so when I learned that this Kogan grass could do that, that was something I never thought about. I just thought of it as invading an understory and a sand hill, or it was all along the roadways. But in some areas, it can really be detrimental in a very much more significant way.
Mm-hmm. And not only crops though, but pasture land and for livestock.
Yeah.
It's taking away what the livestock need to eat. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
So Kogan grass was one of the grasses that was studied here in Brooksville at the Agricultural Research Station that the location that FAMU now owns, as a forage for cattle, and they found that, I think when it was very short, it was, the cows and livestock were able to eat it, but as it grew bigger, and it always does, they couldn't digest it because there's too much silica in the leaves. So it didn't prove to be an effective forage. But going back to, you're talking about butterflies. This is a question for Bill and Lily. I'd like to hear your thoughts on it as well. I read a paper recently talking about milkweed. Okay, and so we've got our native milkweed, and then there's obviously non-native milkweed, and there's kind of this debate whether non-native milkweed should be encouraged and propagated because it's not yet an issue, right? In terms of being invasive, but should it be kept and propagated for monarch butterflies? because they're losing food source because native milkweed is you know, being lost to, habitat degradation and such. So, I guess my thoughts are, every plant that's not yet a problem, that has the potential to become a problem, will become one if you let it. But yeah, so I just kind of wanted to see if you guys had any input specifically to the non-native milkweed and its role for monarch butterflies.
You want me to go, Bill, or you want to start?
I'll go first because I know University of Florida has a plant assessment program where they look at different plants that are not native to Florida and they assess their potential for being invasive. And we have so many different plants in our yard that are not native to Florida. Citrus is not native to Florida. It came from China originally. Crepe myrtles came from Japan. Roses, maybe some roses are native to the U.S., but most of them aren't. But they're not invasive. They don't spread far and wide. They don't cause any kind of ecosystem damage or, extra cost. But they evaluate these plants on a regular basis because things change. So some things, a couple examples, moringa, which a lot of people are very interested in for health benefits. They assessed it and came to the conclusion that it's potentially invasive. So if people start to plant more and more of it, it will escape cultivation more and more, and it will end up on Mike's land more and more. It just hasn't happened yet. It has the potential for that. Medical cannabis is technically potentially invasive. They're still, I think, evaluating that. So that's going to be an issue. How do we keep it contained and, from popping up where it shouldn't? And I could see how the... I
think there'll be very many complaints about that.
No. Well, yeah, I'm sure people will be happy to go out there and help to keep it under control by hand. Mechanical control. But the tropical milkweed does set viable seeds. You have it growing in your yard. If you save the seeds and plant them, they'll come up. And I know a lot of people are growing a lot more milkweed for the monarch butterflies, and the easiest one to get a hold of now is the tropical milkweed. And I could see how it could become invasive as more and more people grow it. We have more plants going, more seeds blowing in the wind. That could potentially be a problem. The native milkweed is so much better, but it's very difficult to get it to germinate and come up. I know UF did have a research program going about finding ways to make it easier for people to germinate and grow their own native milkweed. So if you want to help out the butterflies, native milkweed is definitely the way to go. But I understand that it could be difficult to get a hold of.
They're having more success, especially with the tuberosa, the orange milkweed that grows more in the dry areas too. The two other commercially available are both Perennis and I never remember the other name, but they're both like for wet areas. So that doesn't apply.
Milkweed. I think there's two swamp milkweeds.
Right. Now, as far as the tropical milkweed, the Asclepias persica, which is what you're going to run to your big box store and buy. So, first of all, I've seen it growing in like roadsides where nobody put it. So I've seen its potential to be invasive. But you're going to say, well, that's not a bad thing because then it's helping the monarchs. What they have found with tropical milkweed, we all want to help the monarchs. So we do everything we can to want to have more milkweed around. But as humans do, we usually don't quite get it right. So, we all plant this more milkweed. The most readily available is this tropical milkweed. It doesn't break down in the winter. It just continues to grow. So the least you can do if you have it is cut it back in November and keep cutting it back. Don't let it grow again until April. Because what could happen is you might have so much of it, or we in our neighborhood may, it will confuse the monarchs into staying here instead of going further south, or instead of heading on to Mexico. Not all of them go to Mexico. Some of them just go like South Florida, and they'll freeze. So you have not accomplished, anything that way. Also, there's a natural parasite on these monarchs. Is it OE? Is that what it is, Bill?
Yeah, it's a microorganism.
Right.
It's not a fungus, it's not a virus. I can't remember exactly. It's a microorganism.
Yeah, it's on every monarch. It always has been. But what we are doing is not encouraging social distancing. And I know when they get to Mexico and all pile on top of each other, there's no social distancing. But as far as their journey goes, there should be. And we are encouraging them to hang around and pass this parasite more. Doesn't hurt the monarchs, but it destroys the caterpillars. So in trying to be so helpful, we've created other problems. And really the best answer is, and if you want to be so helpful, then really try to get that the native milkweeds that go down in the winter on, naturally. And a lot of people, they want to grow or breed these monarchs to help out, and they do it all year long, like in their porch or something. And it was a bright, beautiful, warm day, and the butterfly hatched, so I let him out, and it could be February, and that might be a beautiful, warm day. And even if it stays warm, what is growing for that butterfly to nectar on? Not much. So, you should really limit the times that you do it to the warm months, and don't panic. What we recommend is, of course, having butterfly gardens, but also have them outside where nature just happens. And that means sometimes your nutrient-rich, fat, juicy little caterpillars, their destiny was to feed a baby bird. And you've got to accept it all. So that was a very long answer to your question.
It's good to hear, that information. I didn't know about parasites, and
yeah.
So very interesting.
Yeah, I have a master gardener who is an expert on monarch butterflies, and I need to get a hold of him and have him on here one day. And we'll cover all the different issues and problems and pitfalls that you can run across when raising more caterpillars in your yard than would naturally be there. People start to have problems.
And Deb is absolutely right. I have heard horror stories from master gardeners where they even succumbed to the, oh my gosh, more caterpillars than I have milkweed. They've eaten all the milkweed up, so they ran to the big box store, brought more milkweed home. They were all dead the next day, all the caterpillars.
Yeah, and I know that it might have been one of the big box stores said that they were not going to be breeding the milkweed anymore. I'm sure that they've backed off on that. But if you go to a big box store, there's no way that you're going to be able to tell what it's been treated with. It might be a systemic insecticide or a contact insecticide.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like we're getting really, really close to that time. One more real quick, and it was perfect timing. Somebody contacted me on Facebook last night, and I got a question I throw out to you guys there. And this is about invasive plants. And this is from Deanne, who's asked us questions before through Facebook Instant Messenger. She said, I'm interested in learning about invasive plants. I've only lived here a couple of years and realize how little I know. So what would you recommend to her to learn about invasive plants?
So I guess there's a couple ways we could look at it. I mean, if she's interested in invasive plants in the landscape, I would have her maybe look at one of the Florida Friendly Landscaping books. But just in general, good, solid information on invasive plants in Florida. I would visit the University of Florida's Center for Aquatic and Invasive Plants website.
Yep.
So they've recently updated that website. It's a little easier to search for plants that way. But you can go through the plant list, as they've got a full list there. And you can click on each one, and you can look at photos. You can get a description, line drawings. You can get a brief kind of synopsis of, I think, where the plant is from, how it impacts the ecosystem, methods of control, and I think there's also like a comparison, like a look-alike for native plants included in that as well. So that would be a great resource. I always send folks there. And then also, if you're looking like more specific to your region, you could probably look at the the FISP website, which is Florida Invasive Species. I don't. Let me look that up real quick. I don't remember. It used to be Florida Exotic. Yeah, Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council, and now it's FISP now, FISP.
Oh, is it? It's not FLIPSI anymore.
FLIPSI changed their name?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, okay. We like acronyms.
Yeah. So
you would probably still find it online if you put in.
Yes, you would. Yeah.
Council. You'll be surprised. There's like lots of plants on their list.
And if you're curious about a specific plant and you know what the plant is, if you look up the University of Florida Invasive Plant Assessment, they have a big database, because you may not realize there's a lot of plants that if you look it up, it's invasive in South Florida, it's potentially invasive in Central Florida, and it's not a problem in North Florida. Because it's something that's so tropical, it always gets frozen back and killed in North Florida, so it's never going to spread very far. But it may be something that's a huge problem down in South Florida, Miami, and Homestead, because it never freezes down there. So you have to keep that in mind also.
We've also made classes. If you look at Hernando County Government YouTube, I believe I have a class called This, Not That. Mike reminded me when, I'm making suggestions for native or Florida friendly plants as compared to this invasive exotic that has similar features, for what you're looking for. Also, if it's not on the YouTube, I know it's on my Facebook page, Hernando FFL program at Facebook. There is Seductive Invaders. And that's what I, talk about, where you're in love with these plants and the reasons why, because they're so pretty, or they attract wildlife, or they don't take any maintenance. But, the problems that they cause, and better suggestions too.
Yeah, or best thing you can do is just tune into all of our classes.
Yeah.
To learn all about invasive plants and everything else too. So if you go to Hernando Extension, all one word.com, you're going to see a full listing of all of our upcoming classes. As soon as we schedule them and get a date and details, we put it on Facebook. There's a link to our Facebook page also, Hernando Extension. Hernando EXT is the short name. And that way you can follow everything that we're doing. We do invasive plants on it. We do everything, don't we? We cover it all. Let me see.
I'm liking Deb today, Bill.
I can fit up there all at once.
I'm liking Deb today. He says, wonderful classes by Lily, and Bill's pretty good too.
So
Here, let me.
Bill, that other one, FISP, is Florida Invasive Species Partnership. So FLEPC is still active.
FLEPC is like a watchdog group. They have no power or control. They're just like, we're watching you, and then they alert the authorities if something, like you really should be watching this one.
Yeah. But FISP, they're pretty good because you can learn. Every region has a CISMA, which is a cooperative invasive species management area, and it's primarily for land, land managers, but the general public can get involved as well, and they can help out. So our local CISMA is the Nature Coast CISMA, and then private landowners can get assistance in controlling invasive plants, through certain channels that way. So thanks for sharing that link.
Yeah, and education's the most important thing, especially for homeowners, so that when something pops up in your yard, if it's invasive, just pull it out.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, that's the best.
Try to stay ahead.
Any other questions here? Last moment burning questions. Like I said, I'll be back next Thursday, but Lily won't be here with us. And
well, Mike and I will probably be in the same meeting while you're doing this. We are groundwater guardians. I'm very mythical. Yes.
Yes, I know my days are filled with meetings.
Oh, yeah.
2 meetings now, back to back to back.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, hey everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. And if you have a question, and it's not a Thursday morning, feel free to contact one of us. Send us an email, give us a call the office. We are open and we're here to answer your questions. So with that, thank you very much, everybody, and I will see you again next week.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me on today.
Yeah,
Thank you, Mike. Thank you so much.
Great. It was very interesting.